So, as far as a distraction for learning, I think it would count in the category of 100%.
Hi, everyone. This is Bryce Fiddler with Carolina's Academic Leadership Network. Welcome to another episode of the Education Roundtable, our podcast series from the team here at Callan. Today, we'll be diving into an important topic, discussing the issue of cell phones in schools and how South Carolina is tackling this issue. We have a wonderful guest with us today who knows this topic well. I'm happy to be joined by Pam McKinney. Pam is a member of the Charleston County School Board representing District 3. As a former teacher, Pam taught math, including AP Calculus, in the Charleston County School District for a decade, and she brings years of education experience to our discussion today. So, with that, Pam, how are you? Thank you so much for joining the show.
I am doing great and delighted to join as a former educator and a board member, among other things.
To begin, would you like to talk a little bit about your experience on the school board, your experience as a former educator, and your time generally in education?
Certainly. So, if we go chronologically, I graduated Charleston County Schools, went to college, and taught in Charleston County Schools. While I was teaching, I went to the Citadel to earn my master's degree. Loved teaching. It is a passion. I only gave it up to be a wife and a mother, but I satisfied the desire by substituting in the schools that my daughters attended and by teaching Sunday school for little people and adults in our church. So teaching is my passion. I probably joined the school board with a direct outlook to education and how those that teach, those that administer, and those that are in the classroom are involved in education. As a mother and a grandmother, I joined the board with that eye as well. Uh, Thanks to a lot of ability to set aside time to read. I also then, once elected, became um, an avid reader because I was reading policy, I was reading proposed legislation. Um, the year I was elected to the school board, there were nine trustee positions, eight were up for election. So that was unique. It will not happen again because our legislature um, set it up so that we would then be alternating 5 seats and 4 seats on election cycles. But it was a very, very difficult learning curve, being that we were all new and that we had an interim superintendent, not a superintendent. I was fortunate enough to have had some parliamentary procedure experience through philanthropic boards that I had been on. So when I was elected chair, I had some experience and I learned even more.
Mm-hmm.
So learning our district as a whole took a lot of time as well. My district was drawn such so that it covered all three municipalities in Charleston County. I had some schools in North Charleston, some on the peninsula, and some in Mount Pleasant. But voting as a trustee, I vote for all the students in Charleston County.
Yeah, and so you can sort of assess these different education issues from multiple vantage points, right? As a former teacher that's been there in the classroom working with students directly, now serving on the school board, leading the district itself. So,
Right,
it,
right. And after the past election, and after at each November we vote on board officers, and I deemed it best to rotate off as board chair. We have a wonderful new board chair now in Charleston County, and I was elected to the position of chairing the Committee of the Whole. Our Committee of the Whole meets on the second Monday of each month, and our board meeting is on the fourth Monday. I, as chair for Committee of the Whole, had the responsibility of appointing the agenda liaison for strategic education and policy. I made those nominations and called for a board vote.
Yeah. And we know those are extremely important decisions to make. I mean, what you
Yes,
put on that agenda and how you structure your business really decides what the board ends up doing and ultimately the direction of the district in some ways. Would you agree?
I would agree. The agenda planning is very important. It's very important. Our at our board meeting, the chair appointed an audit and finance agenda liaison and committee chair, and the board votes on that. So it's very important to pay attention not just to the board officers, but to the agenda liaisons that the board votes on.
With all that, sort of now that we've talked a little bit about your background, I mean, how serious of an issue would you say, the matter of cell phones in school is, and sort of do you think it poses a major impediment to learning and causes your distractions? What are your sort of high level thoughts on this issue and maybe how we got here?
So, as far as a distraction for learning, I think it would count in the category of 100%. I think we got here because fortunately somebody realized we needed to be here and pushed the issue.
Mm-hmm.
I would credit our teachers and principals for speaking up. They are the direct contact with these students every day. And we know if a window is open and there's a team out for recess in an elementary school, in preschool, even if there's a bird singing on a branch, or in high school, if a team is out playing softball, there is going to be a distraction. So if there is a distraction in your hand or in your ears, you are not learning.
Yeah.
We are all here for the education of our students, and we've got to do what is necessary to make it an optimal experience.
And so with that, what was your reaction when you found out that the state had sort of taken action on this question on a statewide basis? And just for our listeners here, I mean, the South Carolina legislature last year in 2024 added a policy to the state budget, which basically says that all districts in South Carolina have to implement a local policy restricting students' access to cell phones during the entire school day. And there was some questions, some debate back and forth about should we limit it to classroom time or throughout the school day. And they decided to take the stricter route. So as a school board member and a former educator, what was your reaction to that news?
I thought it was wonderful news. I think school boards, teachers, and parents need support. Those that might have questions about it, it opened the door for us to explain why they were a distraction. The reservation that I have is I'm concerned with it being a 1 year commitment by our legislature. I would like for it to be stronger than that so that we aren't addressing this at a board meeting once a year, or parents and students aren't saying, so what's going to happen next year with the cell phones?
Right.
I would like to have the support of the state legislature for it to be even stronger.
Yeah, and you raised an important point here, which is, it's effectively a budget proviso, right? And what this means is that this is a temporary year-long policy that has effectiveness through that budget. So they could come back in the current session when they're developing this new budget and decide to modify that policy or remove it altogether. So there is no permanency or guarantee that this will continue to exist. Whereas if you put it in state law, it's a much more permanent way to implement these things.
Well said. Exactly. And the I I think it has been received so positively that the pushback would be minimal. But why set ourselves up for a discussion and set aside time for something that should just be happening rather than having to go through it all over again?
And I'm very curious to hear more about your approach as a school board to addressing this issue, because that's one of the key features of this, is that districts themselves get to decide a lot of the details about enforcement and
Right.
details and consequences and all that. But first, sort of as this news came out and as sort of the school board thought about this, what were you hearing from the different parties? What were you hearing from parents about this news? What were you hearing from teachers? Did you hear anything from students? I'm curious sort of what the different perspectives were from different folks.
Absolutely. We even had students sign up for public comment during our board meeting. Um, there weren't many, but of course, usually your board comments during the public comment period are items that the public does not want you to do. So, of course, these students were speaking against it. We had it was a mixed bag of comments. Some parents would say, "Thank you. I need the backup for telling my child they cannot have their cell phone during school." And other parents might have said, I had one parent say to me, "Well, I want my child to always have their cell phone with them. I want to be in touch with them in case there is an emergency at their school." And I pointed out to that parent, do you want your student to be talking to you on the phone, or do you want your student to be listening to the instructions that could save their life? And so I was able to, so we had good conversations,
Yeah.
those parents liking it, those with some reservation, that those we had to convince. And parents in Charleston County still have the ability to reach their student if there is a car pickup change or an afternoon schedule change. They call the main office at the school, and the school, in a very timely manner, will get the message to the student. But then it's not a distraction to the student.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can understand that. And I've heard similar thoughts from parents where, they like the idea of being able to reach their child at school at basically any point throughout the day. It's just sort of what we're used to at this point, because
Right.
phones are so commonplace that you just text your kid and say, "Hey, I'm going to be late today picking you up. Expect me at 3 o'clock rather than 2 o'clock." So I think there will be a little bit of a getting used to in the beginning, as we sort of put the phones in lockers or backpacks and sort of focus more on school. But I thought that was an excellent response that you shared to that parent, and it's good that we're having these robust discussions from all
It is.
folks, as the school board is getting to decide on this. And speaking of the school board, I'm curious how you went about sort of developing this local policy. What were some of the specifics that you were looking at? Were there any challenges or obstacles that you faced while you were developing the policy?
Right. So our policy liaison works with staff members and our district attorney. I shouldn't say district attorney, the counsel that works for the district. Um, so it is a joint effort. The staff got input from schools, teachers, administrators, the front office. They had that information. The policy was presented to the trustees by the policy liaison and staff with very few, if any, objections or changes. And Charleston County, and we can address it when we get to that in our conversation. I did appreciate the fact that the state let the details be a local decision, because we all know a and I will use the example of a rural school district versus an urban or suburban. There are different habits
Hmm.
of communication and phones. I mean, there are a lot of places where children don't weren't going to school with a cell phone before this. And then there are other districts where they were too obviously a distraction.
Yeah.
So I think having the local autonomy in that helped a lot.
Yeah, and I think the state recognized that you can't issue a blanket policy or a one size fits all approach when there are so many different variables at the local level. I mean, you mentioned the idea of rural districts, even something about, the phone habits of a child in elementary school are going to be different than they would be in high school. They may not even have a cell phone at that point because they're so
I
young.
hope
And
not.
exactly. Although we know there are some cases where
Oh,
that is
yes.
that is true. So I think they were wise to let the locally elected leaders decide those local matters. And I want to talk a little bit about the sort of question of implementation. I mean, there are
Yes.
a number of different ways where if you have a rule that says students can't access their phones during the school day, there's a number of different paths that you can follow to enforce that rule, whether that be putting it in your locker if your school has lockers, or putting it in a backpack, or even putting it in a pouch or a cubby at the beginning of the day, and then it's collected at the end so you're not even tempted to use it. So how did Charleston think about that, and which path or policy did y'all decide to settle on?
We let again that be governed by each school. As you pointed out, elementary, middle, and high school students probably have different access and or different ways to secure their device. For example, an elementary student, we can't tell them go lock it in the car while you're in school all day long. So what we did is we again left it up to each school. Some chose the storage containers. Some let them store them in lockers. With a lot of the older students, they can have it in their possession, but it has to be turned off and in a book bag, in a pocketbook. It cannot be visible. Um, so we let the schools decide that.
Yeah, and I think that makes the most sense because they, better than anyone else, would know the sort of habits of those students,
Right.
the particular needs, what their resources are. I mean,
Exactly.
I think even I take lockers for granted as something that just you expect most schools, maybe starting in middle school, to have. But the truth is that's not necessarily the case, right?
Not
It
anymore.
depends, and those are being phased out in some places. So you might have to get more creative with where you decide to put those phones. And I'm sure you've seen this. It's if you go to an early screening for a movie or like a Broadway play, they have
Hmm.
these magnetic lock pouches that you can put your phone in. Then you go
Right.
in, you watch because they don't want you to record anything or to take any pictures, and it's locked up. And then when you come out, you get your phone back at the end of the day. And I know
Right.
some districts have even experimented, and some schools have experimented with those pouches too. I put that out there as just to say there are so many different ways
There
that
are,
schools.
and it becomes a budget issue in some cases, purchasing the pouches or the bags rather than just saying, all right, it has to be in your backpack, but it has to be turned off and out of sight. So, budget issues are guidelines in some cases.
Yeah, comes down to what resources does the district have, sort of
Exactly.
a cost benefit analysis situation. Um, is there any advice that you would share with other districts who are also managing this? I mean, we have school board members and district staff across the state that are all answering and tackling the same exact question in their own way. Is there anything that you're proud of that you think Charleston has really gotten right that you would share with other districts? Any lessons learned?
I think being firm, not giving in, letting students know the expectations ahead of time that if you violate this, this is what happens. Violation number one. If you violate it a second time, this is what happens on violation number 2, and you do not want violation number 3 to happen. So I think letting students know it is that serious a matter to us and that we're doing it so they can focus in class. And it's up to us to help provide the best environment for them. Another advantage of this is a reduction in misbehavior. We know that a lot of students prior to this ban of the device, tempers might build during the school day, texting misunderstood or threateningly sent during the school day might result in misbehavior during the school day, on the school bus, or once they got off the school bus.
Yeah.
So it's not it's a bigger picture than most people might think about. It's the environment in the classroom and the behavioral issues for our students. We're trying to help them in both ways. Better behaviors, better grades.
Right, right. I mean, you're right. I mean, the distractions to learning and the disruptions in the classroom are a big part of it, but it's not the whole picture. I mean, if you think about even all of these smartphones are equipped with cameras and social media, and now you've got videos being recorded at school. I mean, let's say there's a fight at the school, and now all the students have their phone out and they're recording it and sending it to other people, and then you have to worry about the embarrassment and the potential for bullying. And I think you really minimize all those concerns when you get phones out of the hands, and I think it simplifies a lot of things.
You're exactly right.
And finally, I just want to sort of leave off with this: is they're sort of in the big picture. What do you hope to see this policy accomplish? What do you hope it'll look like over the next couple of years? We're still early in this, and I think we're still in a learning phase to see what the results will be. But as you look into the future, what do you hope this policy will mean for students and for learning at school?
Well, the 2 things I just referenced earlier, I will be interested in seeing if our state scores go up in reading and math. We, of course, know that will probably take a year and a half or 2 years since the cell phone ban has just been implemented everywhere. And the discipline cases come down, reduce in number. We also know, and we have had some students comment on the fact, well, gosh, I really sat down and talked to the classmate next lunchroom today. I didn't know we had so much in common. So, it's relational that we hope improves in our schools, and we know then that spreads to our communities.
Yeah. And if I could just share a quick story on what you just mentioned. So, going back to the pouches that students would put their phones in. So a couple years ago, there was a district, I think maybe in the Chicago area. It was one of the first in the country to do this. And students among all groups were by far the most resistant to this. That they signed a petition, they were doing interviews, they had a whole campaign against the school to try to get this turned around. But in about a year's time or so, once they sort of adapted to this policy, they turned out to be some of the most supportive people of it. And they realized what you just said is, wow, these conversations that I'm having with people at school that I didn't know actually mean so much more to me than spending all my time on social media. And so there is little bit of a learning curve. It might be uncomfortable in the beginning, but there's a lot of benefits that I don't think we fully understand yet for what these policies might look like in future's time.
You summed it up perfectly, and we've got to give ourselves time to adjust. You brought that up. That's why I said it's going to take a year and a half or 2 years for us to look at our test scores and our behavioral references. But it will come about. But I think we need to implore the legislature to help us. I don't think that would be a hard issue for there to be across the aisle conversations and a unanimous vote.
All right, Pam. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I enjoyed hearing your perspective as a school board member and as a former educator about this issue that so many parents and teachers and students care about. Wishing you and Charleston the best of luck and your success with this policy, and thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you. We look forward to Cal helping us lead the way with this.